Hey, and welcome. This is Jack, and we are live here. And if you're watching this after the event, thank you for being here. This is Why Am I Still Single? I was just shooting some new content this week, and I have a long form video that's coming out about this question. And I thought I would just share some of the highlights and essence of that with you here today. If you are here live, let me know that you're here. Let me know where you're tuning in from. So I'm going to riff on this for a little while, and then I will be taking some questions. So if you have a question, please feel free to type that into the chat box. I'll try to get to that in short order, and I'll get to them in the order that they come in. So why am I still single? I'm going to give you a few directions of inquiry in this question, right? So rather than trying to give you some kind of fully formed answer, I want to encourage you in some directions of inquiry, things that you can explore in your own life and see if they may be illuminating. So one pattern that I see for people who are asking this question is that they may have been in a long-term relationship and then that ended. And then since then, they've struggled with dating or getting back into some kind of connection that could go somewhere. So if this is the case, you may know this at some level, even unconsciously, that you may still be stuck on the thing that happened, right? So that could mean something like you got hurt and you haven't found a way to release that hurt. And perhaps deep down, you're upset and angry about that or how things ended, right? And it's kind of keeping you stuck back there in the past. So if any of you, for instance, are interested in more support in this is something that you couldn't explore in coaching. I will leave the links beneath the video. I will just put them here also in chat because I get people asking me about this. If you want to book a discovery call, which is free to explore coaching, you can book some time on my calendar. I've just shared the link there in the chat. So if you're stuck back there in the past, it may be that you have some story that you should already have moved beyond this, right? That, wow, this was 5, 10, 15, 20 plus years ago, I should have moved on, rather than perhaps being in rapport with where you are. And where you are could be, I still have some difficult feelings about that, and I may need some support, or I may need to take some time for myself to really look at this directly and not in a judgmental way, but in a way that can allow me to release. Hi, Tina, tuning in from Nashville. Welcome. Thanks for being here. If you're just joining us, I'm talking about this question, why am I still single? And I'm giving you some directions of inquiry that may help. So the first possibility is that you're actually still stuck on some difficult feelings about a previous thing, right? And it's totally understandable. We're all going to have difficult feelings. That the point is, have you been able to turn to them in a way that's productive, that actually allows you to feel them and release them and eventually move on? And if you haven't, you may still have some work to do there. Another possibility about why you could still be single is that you haven't ever really appreciated singleness. You've never really found any gift in singleness. And this might sound strange if you've always thought of singleness as kind of like a problem to be solved. But there are some gifts in singleness, right? Sometimes it's easier to be closer to yourself. Sometimes you can get to know yourself in certain ways that you may not have gotten to know yourself if you're in a relationship, and particularly if when you are in some kind of committed connection, or even if you're just dating, you have a lot of attention over there, right? So one of the things that singleness can invite is more attention over here. And that can be an opportunity to get to know yourself, right? You can perhaps explore your authentic desires more. Perhaps when you're single, you can go on different dates with different people and just notice if different parts of you come alive or not, that there may be different ways of you expressing yourself. You might experiment with different personas, different ways of being that may now be more true to you. Perhaps you have been in a committed relationship and let's say you were always the responsible one, or the good girl, or the one that pleased, people pleaser. And now this is an opportunity for you to explore a different way of being. Sometimes that's easier to do in singleness than it is if a relationship has constellated around a particular way of being. And if you start to stray too much beyond that, perhaps it doesn't fit inside of the current relationship. Another reason why you could be single is you haven't actually embraced the mystery, right? Of meaning there isn't always just a one size single answer to a question like that. And perhaps there might be a more empowering question for you to ask. Sometimes there's not an obvious answer. Sometimes life requires us to just show up in a domain of our life and keep asking and keep trying and stay curious. And sometimes when people say, well, I am doing this, when we actually dig in, like if I get on a discovery call with someone and we dig in, what we find is maybe actually they are quite hard on themselves and quite down on themselves. And that's actually their dominant experience of looking into this kind of question. And it's not that they are in a sort of open-minded, non-judgmental inquiry towards themselves, like, is there anything that I could do that would allow me to attract different connections into my life? That's not really the question they're asking. The question they're asking is, why am I still single? I shouldn't be. What's the problem? The problem's me, and I'm kind of down on myself, right? So the inner critic has got hold of the conversation as opposed to the inner coach. The inner coach can ask different questions. What would it take for me to go on more dates? What would it take for me to be open to a new connection? What might it take for me to be open to different types of connection, right? Perhaps I've always had a dominant type and I've always just assumed, well, that's kind of my type. But maybe that type isn't where life wants you to actually constellate a relationship now, right? Maybe life is saying, when you're with that type, you show up in a certain way, but actually your path of authenticity is going to look like something else. So welcome if you're just joining us. I will be taking a few questions here, so feel free to let me know you're here and where you're tuning in from. And also, if you have a question, I also wanted to let you know that we are going to be going on retreat in Italy in April. So if you are interested in doing some deeper and more immersive work, you may be interested in the Authentic You Eat, Stay, Love retreat. Again, there will be a link for that with more information beneath this video. And I'll also just see if I can pop something into the chat here as well for you to check it out. Unfortunately, when I'm posting into the chat, it's taking Jack Butler and making it my YouTube name. So you might have to just delete out a space as you copy that URL. This is going to be an opportunity for anyone that wants to do more work on being more of who they are, but also on any blocks that you might have to receiving, blocks that you may have to love. And also we're going to spend a week of self-care together. So check that out. So the question we're asking here today is, why am I still single? And we've explored a couple of possibilities. And I'm also going to invite you to ask questions. I will be taking those later. So why am I still single? Sometimes I invite people, and I do this actually in one of my online programs in depth, to consider, do you have more of a sales issue or more of a marketing issue, right? So if we just use a business metaphor for a moment, and no metaphor is perfect, but it can just be a way into this question. So if you have more of a marketing issue, it's basically hard for you to find dating prospects, right? So maybe you rarely get matches, or you rarely go on dates, or you rarely go on second dates. So we could say maybe there's like a marketing issue. If more of the issue is actually like a sales issue, it's actually, no, I've got plenty of dates. I can always find dates, happily getting out there and dating, but then nothing seems to tick over into a connection that we're staying more connected through time, then we could say that's a little bit more of a sales issue, right? And so sometimes they're different. One is on the marketing front, it's actually often more about taking more action and being more open to life, like receiving more, being more open to spontaneous conversation, just noticing how your energy is as you move through the world. Are you opening yourself up to connection and conversation? If you've got more of a sales issue, in the sense you've got lots of dating prospects, particularly if you're the one who's saying no to them, then we might be curious about things like, are you actually defending yourself against intimacy, right? Is no one good enough? That's one issue that shows up. Sometimes a similar issue is no one as good as the ex, right? So I'm sort of, again, still I'm a bit back there, and I'm using a form of negative comparison with my ex to not allow something to proceed, right? So it's actually a way of judging guys and sometimes keeping them more distant and not finding them good enough, right? So often the practice there is to actually relax the comparative aspect of your mind, and to see a better practice in dating is almost more, can I love on this person? That doesn't mean I need to fall in love with them or want a connection with them, but can I actually practice softening my heart to notice what is good about the person in front of me, whether they are someone I want to pursue connection with or not? That's sometimes a harder practice, but if you notice you're often judgmental of men, that might be a good thing for you. Hi, Deirdre. Thanks for joining us. If you're joining us, yeah, feel free to say hi. Let us know where you're tuning in from. And thank you also if you are watching this after the event. So if you've got a bit more of a sales problem, one of the things that you can do is also ask for feedback. I think this is an underused resource. Not everyone is open to giving you feedback, and you might find it hard to hear what they feedback, and you don't have to take anything from anyone else as true. It's just an opportunity to gather information. But if you're having a similar situation happening ongoingly in dating, you might get curious, hey, is there some common denominator here that I'm not seeing, right? So sometimes people get feedback, and what they hear is, particularly if you get a kind of a collection of feedback from different people, and you can include, if you're a woman that dates men, you could even include like male friends in this. If they're saying something that's broadly similar, it might just be worth paying attention to, right? Perhaps you come across as really casual, and so people don't know that you're actually serious about dating, or perhaps you come across as super serious and intense, and it's almost like you're in there too quickly, too soon, right? You're likely to move into some kind of premature attachment. Maybe you're kind of standoffish and distant and play hard to get. Maybe no one lives up to your standards, right? Maybe no one's as good as dad, or what's the thing in there that's maybe it, and there may be nothing, right? So these are all directions of inquiry. They're not the truth. That they're you're trusting yourself to find out what might be true about your life by inviting curiosity in certain lines of inquiry. It's a really powerful practice, not just in dating, just in any area of your life that you want to grow and develop, is to get better at inquiry, get better at asking open-ended, non-judgmental questions, and allowing life through time to partner with you and perhaps turn up some results. I see we've got some questions rolling in here. Keep them coming. I will be getting to them shortly. So the reason I put this business metaphor in is just if you felt stuck, sometimes it can be useful to use a different frame. And this frame is basically saying, is the issue getting dates, or is the issue going from dates into some connection that could be more sustained? And they tend to have different problems that are attached to them. Now, you might be listening to this and say, wow, having an abundance of dates, that would be a nice problem to have, right? And it may be, if that hasn't been your experience, perhaps you found it's really hard to get out on dates. And then the question might be, how much are you putting yourself in new and different environments where you can connect with people, right? How much are you doing things that actually bring you alive and it could bring you connection? Can you meet people in a place where you are feeling alive and connected? And if not, can you put yourself in more of those environments? And this isn't easy, but it is simple, right? Meaning that the thing that we're aiming for here is simple to understand, but it does take practice and it does take persistence. What we want to try and avoid is that the main energy you're bringing into your dating is one of frustration, right? It can be incredibly frustrating. So I'm not asking you to disavow your experience. I'm just seeing, is it possible to metabolize some of that and then step into dating from a place that's not just your frustration, right? Because we want to ideally bring a sense of curiosity and possibility if it's available to us. And if it's not, you might take a break. There's no harm in taking a break for a while, putting your focus on other things in your life that maybe have more flow, or where you feel like you get more back. And then perhaps you feel a bit more filled up and you re-enter the dating world from that place. So those are some things about why you could be single. If you want more on this, keep posted, because I will in the coming days, week here, I'll be releasing a new video on this that dimensionalizes much more of what I've started to share here today. I'm going to be looking just quickly here at questions. If you're just joining us, thanks for being here. Let me know if you've got a question. Type it into the chat. Deirdre's in New York. Welcome. Why are men inconsistent? They say they want to communicate and then drop off and disconnect, even though they're what I'm looking for myself and for themselves. So I think what you're saying, they say they want to communicate, but then actually they drop off and disconnect. So what's going on with that? So there's a few things that could be going on with that. So one is that, and this is true, kind of whoever you date, right? We may potentially have different desires and levels of communication, right? So what one person considers wanting to communicate and another person could be completely different. And we might say in gross generalization, it's not uncommon that women want to communicate more than men, right? And that's a gross orienting generalization. Obviously, there's going to be huge numbers of exceptions to that. There are lots of high communication men. I'm just kind of making a gross generalization point. So that's one thing, right? The other thing is, what we're inspired to say in the moment and what actually translates into action can be two different things, right? You'll know this because, maybe we go and sign up for the gym membership and we're excited about it, but ultimately that's a different thing than going to the gym 3 times a week, for the next 6 months, right? So it might be that there was a moment of authenticity in that moment. It wasn't just disingenuous. The guy was like interested and yet in the moment, that's a different thing than is that going to sustain. I tend to say as disappointing as it could be initially, you actually want guys that drop off, right? Meaning that's actually clarification. And simplistically, the majority of guys that you meet are going to be that, right? Because otherwise, it means that they're kind of hanging around for at least, a short or medium term. And mostly that's not our experience in dating, right? That's kind of like a special combination that ends up in that place. So I wouldn't fear the drop off, even though I get it. It doesn't feel nice. You actually kind of want that. And then you want to act on that in a way that allows you to set your standards for what works for you, right? So you might just have, I don't really do drop off. That could just be your standard. Like I actually want something that's got a level of consistency. So as soon as it starts to drop off, I actually label that drop off guy. And I maybe make a clear communication like, hey, I really know what I'm looking for, right? I'm really drawn to a consistency in communication that's important to me. I get that that's not happening here. That's actually fine. And I wanted to be honest with you because I am going to be investing my energy elsewhere. And I'm not saying that as some tactic to get the guy rehooked. I'm actually saying that in my adult sobriety, right? That it's good for both of us to know, to lay out where I stand. And the move there is to take it less personally and to realize that is going to be the majority of instances. And that it's, in a sense, it's okay. What's less okay is when you're then filling in and trying to work hard to kind of fill in the gap, or when that doesn't really work for you, but you continue to hang around. And I'm not saying these judgmentally. We all have done things like this, but you'll find that doesn't tend to serve you. Why are men inconsistent? For a lot of men, this is not where they tend to put their core energy and focus, right? There's other things that are more important to them. Now, that's not the same thing as saying a guy who's really interested won't be consistent. It's just saying if a guy doesn't have a certain level of sustained interest, which we could even say is above his pay grade, right? Which I mean, it's not really a conscious decision, I don't think, in most instances, how our interest is sustained, right? I think some of that is to do with, what's in the dynamic between us, what's the level of attraction, what's the level of mutual interest, and so on. So a guy may drop off just because that level of sustained interest and attraction isn't present for him, right? So even if he wanted to, even if he wanted to stay more connected, or even if he recognizes like, you're a great person, I enjoy connecting with you, there's something else that has to kind of kick in, right? It's almost like, artists make art, musicians make music. There's something about the guy's intrinsic level of interest that needs to be in your direction. And really, nearly all of dating is just filtering for that. And mostly it's going to be a no, right? And that's why it's sometimes hard, because you're going to get a lot of things that peter out. But that's actually just in sobriety, making way for something better, right? Because you actually want something that can sustain. Another possibility is the difference between excitement and aliveness, right? And what I mean by that is, in the moment, there's all sorts of things that we can be very drawn to. We could even be kind of intoxicated by, super arrested by, right? Our attention it's really there. But that's sort of a different thing than over time we mutually bring out each other's aliveness, our sort of authenticity. So sometimes you might have a guy that confuses you because actually he feels excited in your presence, but he doesn't feel sustained aliveness. Now, he probably won't distinguish that or have language to communicate that. You might not even know from your side how to discern one from the other, right? But just even just imagining they are slightly different things, right? There's lots of things that in the moment you might get kind of excited and juiced by and almost like turned on by, but that's different than do you want to kind of keep doing that thing day in, day out? You might have hobbies that you're super excited to explore, but if you were doing them day in, day out, they maybe wouldn't be, you haven't developed that level of sustained interest in them. So that's just a different way of thinking about it. And by the way, obviously, men and women and anyone else operate across a whole spectrum, right? So the question could also be, why are men consistent, right? Like, obviously, there are plenty of men who are showing up for a relationship, right? Who are showing up for their families, right? Who are showing up for their work, who are showing up in all sorts of ways. So it might not be that you've had an experience of relating recently with a man like that, but those those men do exist. And your quickest pathway to that is actually to keep setting your standard of, I'm not interested in the inconsistency. And the minimum amount of effort that you have to put in order to let go of a connection that's inconsistent is the quickest path, I think, generally to something more consistent, right? It's a combination of the saying no and the patience through time. And that can be hard if you haven't had that coming in your field, because you might be saying, well, I can say no all day to inconsistency, but that's all I'm seeing. But part of the inconsistency is also that you get hooked on the inconsistency, and then it ends up costing you confusion, lack of clarity. It costs you, you're getting upset. You've invested emotional energy. Now you're kind of preoccupied by it. Now you're wondering like what's going on over there. And so there's a lot of energy that can invest it there. So I'm saying the more you can learn to dial that back, see it for what it is, get clear and sober, be okay that he may still want connection with you, but actually that it's not good for you, kind of hold your higher self standard in there, the easier through time generally it is, to the point where the question, why are men inconsistent, might occur to you more like, oh yeah, of course, there's tons of men that are inconsistent, but there's also lots of other things out there. And I don't want to get too hypnotized on the inconsistency. It might be the same way that I say, why is food so unhealthy? Because I can just walk down the street and immediately see, a whole set of food outlets and say, even if I like that food, it's kind of unhealthy, right? But I could also walk in the other direction, and then the first thing I come across, I don't know, is a health food store, right? And so I'm asking kind of like a different question. If I'm only used to going in unhealthy food outlets, I might have the perspective that all food's unhealthy. But if I'm also used to having some other experiences, I might say like, oh wow, we're lucky to be in a time where, there's actually a whole load of healthy food available. I mean, geez, I remember the first time I went into like a Whole Foods in, okay, it's Boulder, Colorado. So yeah, it's not everywhere, but I was like, this is crazy. The amount of like gluten-free food they have here, they have like a whole aisle just of cereal. I hadn't seen that anywhere. Right. So, different places, different experiences. But I appreciate the question, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to it. I also say it this way, guys have a right to be inconsistent, and women have a right to be inconsistent. Guys generally don't grow by being inconsistent, right? Now, it might be at a certain stage, inconsistent is all that a guy can offer, and that could be true for a woman also, right? It might be that you've got a certain level of stress in your life. Perhaps you're dealing with some financial stuff or some health stuff. Perhaps there's you've just come out of a connection, so you're not looking for anything serious, right? Maybe ideally you can communicate that, but sometimes it's hard to know how much are you on the rebound or not. That takes a lot of awareness, right? That I don't think most of us, including myself at times, probably fully could say definitively where we sit with that stuff. So lots of reasons why inconsistency may be the best that someone can offer. Ideally, we don't invest our time in, I say we don't get a PhD in breadcrumbing or ghosting or inconsistency. I mean, unless you super actually want to, dig in at that level. But for most of us, I don't think we want a PhD in inconsistency. What we want to do is be able to notice it, right? Just like, do I want a PhD in deep fried foods at McDonald's? No, right? Occasionally, I might eat there because it's nice and I enjoy it as a one-off. Fine. But I don't want that PhD. I'd much rather, and I don't really want a PhD, but if I were to go for one, I would much rather have the one in the healthy foods, right? Because that's the direction that we want to focus on of our investment. So let's just say you had a core belief, men have every right to be inconsistent, right? So I'm going to not make men wrong for being inconsistent, but I will set my requirements for engagement. And that's where I'm going to focus. I think it goes easier for that point. Anytime that we are over there, trying to change people, like for instance, trying to get an inconsistent guy to be consistent with you, that's a huge undertaking. I don't support that undertaking, right? Typically that's not going to work, right? Much better, I think, to stay out of dating longer until you are meeting with something that's got more consistency. Still then, who knows? There's so many other factors that can go into something stabilizing as an actual relationship. But at least we say, okay, this person's on the pitch with some consistency. Now that's got my attention. So in a way, I'm saying for you to be sober, you have to realize that there's going to be a lot of inconsistency in the dating world, right? And I'm not saying that to make you unhopeful. I'm saying that to make you clear and sober. And it allows you then to not be shocked by it, to not be lured by it, to not be kind of like, oh, I got surprised by this, right? I got kind of hoodwinked by it. It's like, no, I've come to expect that, right? Just like there's all sorts of things in life, right? There's viruses, there's mold, there's disease, there's crime, there's all sorts of issues. And it's a kind of a question of where do we focus and how quickly can we say no to something, right? I have sensitivity to mold. So I notice as soon as I get like, the impact in my lungs, I've got to move. I've got to leave that. It doesn't work for me. If I hang around there, it just gets worse. Now, ideally, I might find environments that are mold free, right? Or I might have things that I can do, but I generally just know removing myself, that's my best effort because mold is ubiquitous. So inconsistent men are ubiquitous, but also consistent men are ubiquitous. The question is, can I spot one when they show up? And can I say no to the inconsistency? So I've riffed on this for quite a long time. I think you're going to get my general frame on that. Feel free to have another question. Curious how that's landing. All right, so let's look what's going up here. Question. Are there a few good questions you could suggest that we could ask ourselves to determine whether or not we are ready to date again after an active extended healing season? Yeah, so good question. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that question. So one thing that you could try is actually to run the experiment, right? So you might, I'm kind of riffing on these health metaphors at the moment, but in the same way that if you desensitize to something, right? Let's say you're trying to desensitize to mold or dust, you might just run an experiment by saying, okay, what happens, right? Or if it's gluten, what happens if I eat something? If I get a quick reaction or a small reaction, then I kind of know, oh, maybe I'm not desensitized enough to that. So you might explore going out on a date and see, what's your experience of that? And I think it's fine if you end up feeling like, oh, that's too much, but it's also fine if you're like, this is okay, right? So I think there's a little bit of call and response, right? You do the thing and then you digest it. Maybe you hit your journal, you introspect, you get close to yourself and notice what's going on. I think one of the other things is how much is the previous experience dominating your consciousness? So if every day you're kind of waking up and you're looping on questions about, what could have been or should have been, or maybe there's still a lot of unprocessed feelings, that might let you know that you're not ready for another relationship. I think that's a different question than whether you're ready to, have connection or go on dates. Right now, you may only want to be someone, well, I only date when I'm ready for a relationship. But I also think getting out there and being in connection with people can be part of your healing as well, right? So I wouldn't be too hard and fast with that. I do think it's okay to connect with people. You can also be upfront with them, right, and let them know I'm not really looking for something serious right now. Or, it's still relatively recently I came out of something, so I'm just kind of testing the waters. I think all those frames are allowed. But I don't know that it's going to be something that's amenable to sort of like a science. I think it's going to be a little bit more of an art. Questions could be, how open do I feel to receiving attention from a man? Let's say if you're a woman that dates men, how open do I feel to putting myself out there? How ready am I to allow sort of something else to be in my consciousness? How good a care am I taking of myself? Right? And that's not to set an impossibly high standard of self-care, but just there's normally a period of time and healing. And it sounds like you've been in this. So kind of just also congrats for being able and willing to go into a kind of an active or extended healing season. Because oftentimes it's easy to skip over that bit. But if you've been doing it for quite a while, then, I would say, let's see where you get to. The other thing is to know what your general tendencies are. All right. Now, there could be a uniqueness to the situation you've come out of. You might have come out of a relationship that, is sort of unique. But you might notice in life, you have a general pattern, right? Some people's general pattern is more in the direction of sort of quick and impulsive, right? And some people's pattern is more in the direction of slow and not taking action. So just on that, and it's not a perfect binary, right? But just on that polarity, sometimes just noting some people need to take action before they feel comfortable. That's sort of their big learning in life, right? They don't quite feel ready, but they're always like ready, aim, fire. And they actually need to do a bit more ready, aim, fire. And for some people, they find it really hard to be single, so actually learning how to dwell in that and stay present and stay close to yourself. I do think connection is healing, so if you're going through an active or extended healing season, I do think having connection, whatever that looks like, right? That can be non-romantic connection, that can be friendship connection, but I do think connection is an important part of that process. So thank you for the question. Let me know if you got any follow-up from that. Thank you if you're joining us here live. I'm just taking a few questions. We will be wrapping up here shortly. Thank you also if you've been watching this after the event. You'll see there are a couple of links beneath this video. The first is some information about our Italy retreat. The second is an invitation to my calendar if you'd like to book a discovery call with a view to getting some one-to-one coaching and support. That might be of interest to you if you're in a situation that you're stuck on and you know that you actually might have to let it go. It could also be for you if the preliminary comments I was making were resonating about needing to get out there and date more. It could also be for you if you just know there's kind of like a dominant thing that keeps happening, but I'm not really sure why, and I could use getting some help and support. I'm good at partnering with people to just dig in and find out what's actually going on and where that might show up in your inner work, right? What is, if anything, is there on our side of the fence that we can do, because we want to be out of the business of arranging other people and more in the business of relaxing more deeply into ourselves. Mareva, hey, welcome from the Bay Area. Fun. Yes. Thank you for being here. Having a beautiful time staying sober to the men in front of me, listening avidly to my gut. What a great way of saying that. I don't think I've ever heard anyone say that. Listening avidly to my gut and being open to my lessons, my patterns, my triggers. Thanks to your coaching and my continued learning as I made this a priority focus. That is really good. I appreciate hearing that. I'm just flicking through here to see if we got questions. Those are great questions to ask regarding readiness to date. Very helpful. Yes, right on. Question: what do you think of women who force themselves on men and the man accepting her so she didn't lower herself anymore? I'm not sure if I understand the second part of that. I obviously am not a fan of anyone forcing themselves on anyone. That's not right. If you mean, let's take something that might be more within the bandwidth of acceptability. So should a woman pursue a man that she's interested in? Generally speaking, most of the women that I've worked with, they have a desire to be pursued, right? Now, that may or may not be true for you. I'm talking in gross orienting generalization. So from that perspective, it's generally not a great idea to pursue a guy. That said, I don't try and be too hard and fast about these things. There is a pragmatism, right? Whatever works. If you know that you always pursue and you can never sit back, I would encourage you to practice that, because it would be a good experience for you, and it might allow you to receive more and kind of get out of search and solve mode. Sometimes there can be a little bit of like a prodding a guy's consciousness to give him the green light and to say, hey, like, I'm interested to get to know you more. But that also we can distinguish from pursuing. But generally, there's going to be a pursuer, right? And so there are some guys that are good relationship material that are going to be in the category of pursued, right? That might not be where the main tendency in this space is, but I'm saying that could be a possibility. But I see that as a different thing than someone accepting standards that aren't true to them. I do think of standards a little bit differently than most people, meaning I think there's like a stage of development piece in here, right? So if you haven't honored your requirements and standards, it can be really good to practice honoring your requirements and standards. And that's, a big piece of work. And for some of us, that might be ongoing work. then there can be a place of this inquiry of like, actually, who am I without my standards, right? Because back to what we were saying earlier, sometimes standards can be a way of not having to be in so much contact, right? Or they can be a way of being one up from someone else. They could be a way of kind of unconsciously being in a sort of power dynamic. So there's some subtlety to this territory, right? All standards and no heart, I'm not a fan of, right? Owning your standards in an authentic way, being willing to say no to what's not that, and bringing your heart forward, that to me is a more integrated combination. And most of the people who hang around on this channel are interested in being a more integrated, authentic version of themselves. So yeah, I hope that's helpful. Just flicking through here. I ended a marriage. I'm now dating an emotionally unavailable man. Does it mean I'm not fully ready and able to attract a stable and fully committed man? No, I don't think it does mean that. You know, it might be that, you know, it might be that it's inviting you to hold your no, right? That you actually are looking for something that's emotionally available. I mean, there is a little bit of texture, I think, to this territory of emotional availability, right? Sort of meaning it is an essentially contested concept, I would think. What does that mean? It means there's not like a universally singular definition, and people sometimes mean different things. So I do invite people to unpack what they mean by that. If by that you mean a man who is interested to step into a more committed style of relationship, and that's what you want, then yeah, you know, take that stand. It just might be that it takes some time through time. There's also, I invite people to own the authenticity of their relational path, right? Sort of meaning life might have a whole curriculum for you, right? Sometimes it looks like, you know, a long-term relationship, right? And then a few shorter-term relationships, and then maybe a barren period, or maybe like another long-term relationship, or you know, any number of combinations thereof, right? I think there's sort of a kind of a societal standard that it should look a certain way, but I actually think when people embrace their path, there's a lot of non-linearity to it, and it doesn't necessarily look like your best girlfriend's path. And so part of it is actually fully accepting your path. It might be that now life wants you to be more authentic in a certain way, and it's not going to constellate a relationship around something that it would have in the past, because you're actually kind of progressing and moving more into your authenticity. And so some of that might be that what shows up is going to help you learn a few relationship lessons, but it's not actually about immediately stabilizing another thing, right? Sometimes life also wants enough period of time between serious things so that you can do your introspection, you can have some more time to heal and learn some lessons, right? So there's also sometimes a wisdom in spacing things out. Back on the emotional unavailability, right? So what does that mean? It could mean someone's not wanting to commit, right? Emotional unavailability could mean I don't really track you emotionally, so I'm not really responsive to your emotions or your emotional needs. And again, yeah, you might have a requirement that I want a guy that's able to do that. Emotional unavailability could be a guy who never opens up to you, right? And you might say, yes, I actually want a guy that's able to open up to me. But sometimes when I've dug into this, even though I think most women like the idea of a guy opening up to them emotionally, what they've actually meant when we dig it down into it is that he doesn't respond how I would respond to my emotions, right? So if someone were upset in the way that I'm upset, I would respond this way, and he kind of doesn't, right? Or he gets busy with something else, or, you know, so I'm just inviting the possibility that two people can respond to things in quite different ways. And it's not necessarily that the guy's doing something wrong. It could be that there's a capacity that he hasn't fully learned. And that's probably most of us, right? As men, I would say. But it also could be that he's never really had a situation where that's been what he's taken aim at, right? I don't think many men wander around at the beginning of the week when they think about what are my goals this week and think I want to become more emotionally available. Now, that might not be that would be a valid goal. You might be thinking, well, gosh, if all the men did that, we'd be in a different world, maybe. But I'm just saying that doesn't tend to be, I think, a high priority that shows up on the goal list of most men. And maybe there's a subset of men who are already better at that. Maybe there are certain dynamics where that comes forward more. You know, evolutionarily, I think for most of evolution, guys haven't really been expected to be certain kinds of emotionally available. Again, if you're talking about commitment, you know, I think that's been prevalent, through a lot of cultural and historical contexts. But if you go to countries where there's a more traditional cultural context, let's say, what I tend to see is men hang out with men more and women hang out with women more. And so I think when men hang out with men, it's not really predicated upon emotional availability, right? I think there's many other things that men do together and can count on each other for, but I don't think we tend to think of it through that lens. So, I'm maybe taking that question wider than you envisaged it, but I'm just sort of opening it up. What does it actually mean? I do think there's instances where you can train men, right? I think it's good as men that we can be open to being trained. You might think that sounds derogatory. I don't mean it that way. Just like, yeah, maybe there's a capacity that you actually have more of than he has, but you value it. So you want to see if he can cultivate it. Again, that's probably more likely to come from a more, serious or committed style of connection, right? Also in the dating pool, you're probably going to have a slightly higher proportion of potentially emotionally unavailable men. Again, whatever we exactly mean by that, just because if one of those facets is commitment, then some of those more commitment-oriented men are going to be in some kind of commitment, right? So, again, right back to that previous question I was giving quite a lengthy answer to. It could just be that the real piece for you here is to be able to say yes and no to what's working for you, right? Rather than turning it into will I ever find? Like, yes, you can find, because there's so much out there, right, to be connected with. But maybe where we get stuck is when we notice something that's not quite working or not right, and actually we're trying to make it something that it isn't, right? So that sort of, does a guy respond to you emotionally? You probably can discern relatively early on in connecting with him. And I'm just inviting a bit of breadth in how you think about that, right? Because a guy might respond emotionally by trying to do something quite practical for you, right? He's heard that you're upset, but he's trying to fix the problem. So sometimes learning how to frame, this is the kind of support that I really need right now. It's actually not solutions. It's I need you just to hear me, right? There's something I need to get off my chest, and I want you to hear me. I think generally either way in a relationship, it can be helpful if we can prime that way. And I'm not sure that culturally we've gotten a lot of experience of that. I don't know if we're really taught how to do that well. There's different types of support, right? There's practical support, there's kind of information support, right? I'm trying to make a decision. Can I talk this through with you? And then there's emotional support that might be more like validation and feeling heard. And that's probably the one generally that you might value the most. Again, gross orienting generalization as a woman. And it's probably the one that, as a gross orienting generalization, a man might value least, unless he has that as a high preference, or he's been given a lot of reward for doing that in the past. But I don't know that that's the first thing that a guy is going to think if you come to him with something, right? So I'm just sort of opening this out. This is a good territory, for getting clear on what it is that we want. But I think you'll know how ready you feel for a connection. And it maybe is just a bit about trusting yourself and also staying patient through time. Do the discovery call Jackson Master Coach. Well, thank you, Mariva. I appreciate that. I appreciate our work together. Can two people be happy in the relationship if they have different values? That's an interesting question. So I think that depends on something like the difference between surface and deep values. So what I mean by that is deep values, I think of as the sort of the way that you make meaning of the world, right? So one way of thinking, even at the moment, about the culture wars is that there are different sets of values or ways of making meaning about the world and what's important, and they are kind of clashing. So I think those kind of values differences, which I tend to think of as like traditional, modern, postmodern, they are looking at the world kind of differently. And no one is probably only located within one of those, but you probably have a center of gravity. So if you know that you have traditional values, I would probably say find someone that has traditional values, right? If you know that you have postmodern values, right, much more to do with, for instance, being woke is like one expression of that. For some people, that's the thing to aspire to. For some people, that's kind of like a dirty word. But in postmodern values, people are more likely to value their own individuality, their own authenticity. There's more likely to be much more of an inward turn to sort of who am I really beyond some of the ways that I was brought up, or my kind of programming. There's going to be a deeper inquiry there. Let people who like doing that do it together, right? Across those value systems, I think it's pretty hard. Now, if your value is fun, right, and my value is thriftiness, that may be a place that we rub up, but that may be a bit more workable if we still have some of these deep value sets in common. So the other thing I've noticed about this is it can be easy for people to sort of state what their aspirational values are, but whether that's the same thing as what is actually driving your behavior, right? What is actually making you do the things that you do? Or let's say you're stressed, what is driving your behavior? That can be a different set of things. So I might say, yes, my values are, adventure and fun and outdoor activities, right? So that may be true, right? But if you look at actually how do I spend my money, right? Or how do I make my decisions, or what comes in what order of priority, that's sometimes a different question. And I think if you've got sufficiently different priorities, that's where it can get pretty tricky. Sometimes having slightly different values is good, right? So if I'm a bit more of a spender and you're a bit more of a saver, then maybe there's a way that we can balance each other out. But if that goes too far, it will often be the cause of friction. So there's a difference, I guess, between creative tension and something that just becomes, unworkable. I don't think you want to be in a situation where someone's values would have to change substantively in order for the thing to work. But I also wouldn't be afraid of getting into some kind of relationship and finding out, right? And actually just seeing and kind of running it and, letting it be shown to you. We also have different moving away from values, right? So again, sometimes we have things that motivate us on the sort of the negative side, like what are we afraid of? What are we moving away from? What are we avoiding? And those things can drive our behavior sometimes more than our moving towards values, right? And people vary. Some people are very moving towards, right? It's all about the possibility. It's the vision. It's like, take me to the place of better. And other people are much more driven to avoid pain, so they're moving away from things. Those two in combination are probably going to be quite difficult, so that's something that you can look into yourself or work out. Said differently, I don't know that we're always super good at articulating all our values kind of up front, and so it could be a question of noticing through time what are the things that are actually driving our behavior. All right, I'm going to stick a quick link down here in the chat. If you want to explore coaching with me, you can get a discovery call on the calendar. The other link that I posted, I'm just going to flick back up here. It's showing, but it's showing a little bit limited in the chat. So if you're interested in joining us on retreat after the session's finished, or if you're watching this after the event, it will be the first link that is live beneath the video. So we're going to wrap there. It's on the hour. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. If you've got questions that are still there, feel free to post them under the video and I'll try and get to as many as I can. As always, I'm Jack. Thanks for being here and have a great start to your weekend. All right. Bye for now.